Today, we are strapping in for what is, without question, one of the most agonizing, beautiful, and profoundly unjust stories in the entire canon of classic literature.
You really are.
We're venturing into Thomas Hardy's masterpiece.
Yeah, we've been given a stack of material focused entirely on Tess of the D'Urbervilles, a pure woman faithfully presented.
Right.
And it is, it's a relentless, emotionally exhausting, but absolutely vital piece of work. It just forces you to confront some really uncomfortable truths.
About morality, social structure, everything.
Everything.
Our mission today is, well, it's straightforward, but it's demanding. We're taking a deep dive into the tragedy of Tess Durbeyfield. We're going to analyze the structure, the context, historical and cultural, and these unforgettable, sometimes unforgivable characters that Hardy created.
Right.
We really want to understand, in granular detail, why this story is still at a timeless discussion on justice, morality, and just the crushing weight of societal expectation.
Precisely. We're looking specifically at that incredible, unyielding tension between fate, the brutal randomness of events, and the immovable force of these rigid societal rules.
And individual innocence just getting crushed between them.
Exactly, the heartbreaking collapse of it. You'll find that every choice Tess makes, every single hopeful turn of the page, is just shadowed by forces far, far beyond her control.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's get right to the core of why this classic, set in the deep rural past, is worth every second of our focus today. What is the one sentence, that singular controversial idea, that makes this book so essential to understand, even now in 2025?
It's the central, devastating irony that Hardy constructed. It's what critics have been debating for, over a century now? The core contention is this.
Okay.
This is a story where a young woman survives the open malice of her villain, only to be utterly destroyed by the hidden hypocrisy of her supposed hero.
That is the perfect chilling hook, because you go into this story expecting the traditional narrative.
Of course.
The innocent girl, the evil rake Alec d'Urberville, who represents this, blatant, predictable cruelty. But you walk away with this profound, cold realization that it was the good man.
The good man.
The intellectual, the idealist, Angel Clare, who truly sealed her tragic fate.
And that's the fundamental shift in the whole narrative. We're exploring in really intimate detail how a good man's love, which is conditioned by these impossible ideals, can actually be more destructive than an enemy's hate.
Wow.
We have to ask, how can an honest heart do more damage than a malicious one? That is what this deep dive is going to force you to confront.
You will question everything you think you know about love, forgiveness, and who the real bad guy is. Let's set the stage and watch how this relentless machinery of fate just begins to grind. So we start in the late 19th century, and the setting itself is almost a character in this book, isn't it? It just so deeply reflects Tess's emotional state.
Absolutely.
We're in the secluded, rural poverty of Wessex, specifically the Vale of Blackmoor, around the small village of Marlet. This is a world governed entirely by the harsh rhythms of the seasons and, the immovable weight of tradition.
It's a completely closed system. Life there is simple, agricultural, and it's constantly on the brink of disaster, governed by these really thin margins. And we're introduced immediately to the Durbeyfield family, whose poverty is this constant, grinding pressure that informs every single decision they make.
And at the center is Tess Durbeyfield. She's the beautiful, innocent, and deeply burdened eldest daughter. She's introduced carrying the weight of her younger siblings, and she has this natural sense of responsibility that's just far beyond her young years.
And her character is immediately contrasted with her parents.
Oh, massively.
Yes, the sources really emphasize the parents' profound failings. John Durbeyfield, the father, he's described as a drunkard and a dreamer, a haggler by trade, with a really weak will. He's much more interested in the tavern than in supporting his family.
And the mother.
Her mother, Joan, has this sort of simple, almost crude faith mixed with even simpler superstitions. She sees fate, usually bad fate, in every minor incident. They're just focused on social vanity, not practical survival.
But we also get this initial glimpse of an alternate possibility right at the very start. Angel Clare. He's the thoughtful young man passing through on a walking tour. He's there at the May Day dance. He sees Tess. And there is this fleeting, inconsequential moment, a chance for happiness that is immediately missed.
Hardy ensures that even this first moment feels like powerful foreshadowing. It's a happiness that might have been if only Tess hadn't been distracted by her father's, aristocratic delusion. Tess feels this pang of regret for not dancing with him.
And that tiny regret just gets magnified across the entire scope of the novel into a life-altering disaster.
Exactly.
So the general premise, before the real catastrophe strikes, is that Tess's life of simple poverty is suddenly upended. Her father finds out they are supposedly descendants of the ancient D'Urberville Knights.
Right. This discovery, which is fueled by her parents' vanity, leads to this foolish, desperate scheme to claim Can for financial aid. But this scheme is only put into motion because of a catastrophic, tragic accident.
And that accident is the original sin. It's the thing that sets the entire relentless machinery of fate in motion.
It is. The sources highlight that the Derbyfield family's entire existence is hanging on one thin thread. Their aging horse, Prince. He's their livelihood, their only way to get to market.
And because her father is too inebriated to go, Tess volunteers. She has to make a necessary delivery to market, and her young brother is with her. She's just utterly exhausted from long days of work, and she falls asleep at the reins.
In the treacherous pre-dawn fog, this is where fate is just brutally swift and silent. A fast-moving mail cart, its lamps described chillingly as two accusing eyes, appears out of the mist.
And Prince is fatally impaled on the shaft. The horse's death is sudden, it's violent, and that image of Tess covered in the horse's warm blood becomes a symbol of her immediate unearned contamination.
And that emotional weight is so critical. Tess is consumed by this overwhelming, profound guilt.
Right. She doesn't process this as bad luck or, a systemic failure because they're poor. She sees it as a personal, moral failure.
She believes the entire financial ruin of her family rests squarely on her shoulders. This deep, crushing sense of self-blame is, as our sources state, the true engine of the novel.
And that self-blame is the lever her parents ruthlessly use. They take this discovery of the noble lineage, a name the source describes as a curse, not a blessing, and they use it to pressure Tess.
They push her into seeking patronage at Trantridge.
The mother's crude insinuations about using Tess's beauty are just profoundly disturbing. Tess is horrified by it, but her guilt over Prince's death is the powerful, inescapable motivator.
So she agrees, reluctantly. She sees it as her sacred duty to repair the damage she believes she caused. And she's leaving her simple world for one of shadow and sophistication she is completely unprepared for.
And that shadow takes the form of Alec d'Urberville, who lives at the slopes.
And the sources describe this house as a place of vivid reds. You have the strawberries, the roses, the man's sexual lips, all signaling danger, indulgence, and superficiality. The reds are deceptive, a facade that hides this moral darkness.
Alec isn't a true aristocrat, is he? His family just bought the name.
Exactly. They got wealthy from manufacturing. This purchase status mirrors the superficiality of his character. He's defined by idle leisure, casual cruelty, and he sees Tess immediately as a prize to be won, a simple country thing to be conquered.
And the manipulation is immediate and strategic. It's designed to isolate her.
Absolutely. Alec gets a position for her tending his blind mother's poultry. This is so key because it places her in a solitary job on the fringes of the estate. It isolates her, makes her dependent on him, and cuts her off from the solidarity of the other workers.
His pursuit is relentless, and it's psychological. He uses gifts, this worldly cynicism, his position of power, to slowly wear down her defenses. It creates this atmosphere of constant unease.
She is completely out of her depth. She's trapped in a game she doesn't even know she's playing.
And this calculated psychological wearing down leads, inevitably, to the fatal encounter.
It's a tragedy that unfolds under the cover of the natural world, which just illustrates that human morality can regress in the face of nature's indifference.
That fateful night happens after a country fair. Tess is manipulated into accepting a ride home from Alec after this public fight with a rival.
And he deliberately gets them lost in a dense, ancient forest known as the Chase.
Hardy uses the setting of the chase so masterfully.
Oh, he does. It's described as a place of primal darkness with gnarled trees and disorienting fog. It strips away that superficial veneer of civilization and propriety, and it becomes a setting where primal instincts just dominate.
And in that primal darkness, Alec takes advantage of her extreme exhaustion and vulnerability. It's a moment where Tess's world is, as the source says, irrevocably broken.
It's a violation that defines her public life from that moment on, regardless of her innocence.
She returns home carrying shame, and soon, a child. This is where we see the intense cruelty of the society she lives in. She is, and I'm quoting here because it's so perfect, canceled by her entire world for something that wasn't her fault.
Which is a chillingly familiar concept, as you noted. Even in our modern digital age of public shaming and victim blaming, she endures the cruel taunts and whispers with this quiet, fierce dignity.
But her strength really emerges in her fierce maternal love. When her baby is born frail and sickly, she fears for his soul. She's desperate to secure his place in heaven.
But the local vicar refuses a proper Christian ceremony. He views her and the child as tainted by sin.
This refusal, based on these rigid external rules, pushes Tess toward an act of profound spiritual agency.
She takes the spiritual authority on herself. She gathers her younger siblings as a makeshift congregation, performs this moving, desperate ritual, baptizes the baby with water from a bowl, and names him Sorrow.
It's a profound moment of individual religious and moral agency in a life that's been defined by the actions and judgments of others.
Right. And the baby's death a few weeks later is a tragedy, but the source notes it's also a release for Tess. She's paid the highest spiritual price, and she's determined not to be defined by this past.
Well, she seeks resurrection.
She needs a place where her name and her tragic story are completely unknown, where she can work, heal, and try to start over, away from the judgmental eyes of Marlet.
This desire for anonymity and a fresh start is what leads her out of the shadow and into the light. And that light takes the physical, glorious form of Talbotha's Dairy. This is a complete environmental and psychological shift. Tell us how the setting itself prepares the audience for hope.
It is described explicitly as a baptism. Hardy paints it as this physical place of just unparalleled hope. It's lush, it's fuddle, it's governed by honest, natural rhythms of production and life.
You can almost smell it.
You can. The air is thick with the scent of milk, grass, and hay. It is the complete opposite of the shadowy sophistication of the slopes or the grinding, judgmental reality of Marlet.
And for the first time since the tragedy of Prince's death, Tess finds peace. She's physically working the earth, and she begins to rediscover the joyful, innocent young woman she was before her path crossed Alex.
And of course, this is where fate, or maybe just dramatic inevitability, brings Angel Clare back into her life.
He's the thoughtful young man from the May Day dance.
Now working as an apprentice farmer, seeking authenticity.
Angel is the intellectual idealist. He's the intelligent son of a strict clergyman, but he's intellectually estranged from his father's rigid church doctrines. He's explicitly rejected that unforgiving system for what he believes is a pure life.
A life connected to the earth and true labor.
And this intellectual rejection of Victorian rigidity is precisely what makes his later actions so devastatingly hypocritical.
It really is. He's immediately drawn to Tess, but he puts her on this impossible pedestal. He sees her not as a complex, suffering woman who has endured trauma, but as an unspoiled child of nature.
The rustic authenticity he admires so much.
Exactly.
We see that tragic tendency in his language, don't we? He literally idealizes her, calling her Artemis and Demeter, these ancient pagan goddesses of the earth. He is completely blind to the reality of the real suffering woman before him.
And this idealization is a crushing weight that Tess, ironically, feels obligated to live up to. She's terrified that if she reveals her true history, she will lose the only person who has ever truly seen her inner worth.
Their romance is intentionally described as beautiful because it seems so pure and rooted in mutual respect.
It blossoms slowly, built on shared work, quiet conversations in the water meadows, and mutual admiration for each other's minds. Angel teaches her history, philosophy, and how to play the harp.
And the sound of his harp. The source highlights the music drifting across the meadows. It's the perfect soundtrack to their budding, redeeming love. Tess believes Angel's love is powerful enough to wash away her past, to make her worthy of happiness again.
He seems like a modern, forgiving spirit, the antidote to Marlet's judgment.
But when he proposes, Tess is tormented. She knows she has to tell him the truth, but every time she tries, she feels the weight of his impossible idealization.
She finally accepts, deliriously happy, but the dark cloud of her secret remains, ready to unleash the storm.
Which brings us to the wedding night. A sequence that is not just tragic, but a masterclass in dramatic irony and staggering world-ending hypocrisy. Tess knows she must be honest. So on the eve of the wedding, she writes a detailed confession, laying out the entire tragedy of Alec d'Urberville and the birth and death of Sorrow.
And she slips it under his door, determined to allow him a clean escape if the truth is too much.
But fate intervenes, yet again.
The letter slides under the carpet, unseen. They stand at the altar, Tess burdened by the crushing, unspoken truth, Angel blissfully ignorant of the depth and complexity of the woman he has married. This small physical accident, a letter sliding under a rug, has the weight of destiny.
Then comes the devastating turn. On their wedding night, in the warm glow of their rented cottage, Angel decides to clear his own conscience first.
And this is where the dramatic irony is at its absolute peak. It's where the sources suggest Hardy is most deliberately setting up Angel's fall.
Angel casually confesses a past indiscretion, a sordid 48-hour affair with an older woman in London. He treats it as a minor smudge on his otherwise pure record.
Something easily dismissed and moved past. An intellectual curiosity more than a moral transgression.
Let's just pause there for a second. This is a critical comparison. Angel's indiscretion was an active, conscious choice made by an adult. It resulted in no lasting trauma or consequence for him.
None at all.
Tess's tragedy was a brutal violation, an event forced upon her when she was vulnerable, resulting in life-altering consequences, societal shame, and the death of a child. How do the sources emphasize that difference in moral weight?
They emphasize the complete lack of consequence for Angel. It was a momentary lapse. It didn't change his station, his reputation, or his future. Hardy uses this casual confession to underscore Angel's own privileged view of morality.
He assumes his past is negligible because society forgives men.
While Tess's past, though involuntary, is fatal because society condemns women.
And what does Tess do?
Yeah.
With the pure generosity and defining love that makes her character so monumental, she immediately forgives him.
Instantly.
She dismisses his past, solidifying her belief in their mutual understanding. She feels emboldened, thinking, if he, the idealist, can be forgiven for a fault of his own making, surely I can be forgiven for an injustice done to me.
So she tells him her story, and the world collapses. As she speaks, the warm, intimate atmosphere turns instantly cold. Angel, the loving, progressive idealist who rejected his father's rigid church, transforms before her eyes into a cold, merciless judge.
He's utterly shattered.
Yeah.
But the source materials make it searingly clear why he is shattered. It's not out of sympathy for her trauma.
No, it's because his idealized image of Tess is destroyed. He cannot see the victim of injustice. He can only see the tainted woman who spoiled his precious goddess, Artemis.
This is the definitive breakdown of his supposed ideals. His intellectual, progressive views about life and forgiveness just crumble instantly when faced with a visceral, personal reality he can't square with his expectations of feminine purity.
His hypocrisy is truly staggering, especially in light of the immediate generosity Tess just showed him. He demonstrates that he loves an ideal he projected onto her, not the woman herself.
It forces us to confront that brutal question that defines the novel's controversy, doesn't it? Is Angel merely a product of his time, reflecting ingrained Victorian purity standards? Or is he simply a breathtaking hypocrite whose failure is universal?
Does the person who loves you have the right to be your ultimate judge?
Right.
And the sources make a strong case that it is a universal failure. While Victorian society provided the language for his judgment, his choice to reject her, despite her innocence, is a failure of character and empathy.
His intellectual rejection of morality just stops abruptly when that morality applies to his own comfort and expectations.
And his rejection is total and psychologically devastating.
His inability to process the information leads him to retreat into an action that is just pure symbolism, demonstrating the death of his love and his ideals.
This is the haunting sleepwalking scene. It's one of the most memorable pieces of symbolism in all of English literature. A few nights later, Angel walks in his sleep, murmuring about his dead Tess.
And he lifts her, carries her across a narrow footbridge over a rushing river.
And lays her gently in an empty stone coffin in the ruins of an old abbey.
It is an incredible, haunting symbol. By placing her in the stone coffin, he is declaring that his wife is dead in his heart. His ideals are so inflexible that he physically and emotionally buries the real woman, reserving his love only for the ghost of the perfect woman he invented.
And despite her desperate pleas, the rejection remains total. He gives her a small amount of money and announces he's departing for Brazil to start a new farm, leaving her married but utterly abandoned.
He essentially transfers his guilt onto her, escaping to the New World to rebuild his own untainted life.
The perfect, hopeful future built on the lush ground of Talbothays had turned to ash in a single night of judgment.
Tess is now left to fend for herself with the stigma of being a rejected wife, a position even more precarious than being an unmarried mother, trapped between the law and society's judgment.
And this leads us directly into the hellscape of the next setting, winter at Flint Camash. A brutal, essential transition in her descent.
Flint Camash isn't just a season or a place. The sources define it clearly as a punishment.
A physical manifestation of Tess's emotional despair. Hardy uses it to symbolize the emotional and physical erosion of her spirit. It is the complete, brutal opposite of the heaven she found at Talbothays.
The hardship here is total and unforgiving. The landscape is barren, all cold mud and sharp, flinty stones. The sensory contrast with the soft, fertile, scented landscape of Talbothays is so intentional. Here, there is only grinding pain and silence.
And Tess works until her hands are raw, engaged in this brutal, soul-crushing, labor-like sweet hacking, hacking the tough turnips from the frozen ground. Her spirit, which had begun to heal at Talbothays, starts to erode again.
This prolonged period of suffering is so vital because it systematically breaks her connection to hope.
And of course, in this vulnerable, desperate state, her past returns to haunt her. The predator follows the victim. She re-encounters Alec d'Urberville.
And he's at a makeover.
He reappears having undergone a supposed religious conversion. He's now working as an itinerant preacher, trying to save souls by shouting damnation. This attempt at piety is revealed to be just as much of a facade as his purchased noble name.
It's a hearty, subtle commentary on performative morality.
Because the moment he sees Tess, his old possessive obsession rekindles instantly. He abandons his supposed newfound faith as quickly as he adopted it, tearing down his own makeshift cross and beginning his relentless, cynical pursuit of her all over again.
But this time, his tactic is so cruel and insidious. He psychologically manipulates her, blaming her for tempting him away from his righteous path.
He frames himself as the victim of her beauty. Tess resists fiercely, clinging to the small, shrinking hope that Angel will return and rescue her from this perpetual suffering.
But the clock is ticking, and Alec knows exactly how to break her, recognizing the profound weakness that defined her earlier tragedy, her guilt and sense of responsibility toward her family.
News reaches Tess of her family's extreme poverty and the subsequent death of her weak-willed father, John Derbyfield. The family is being evicted from their cottage.
And Alec weaponizes her profound sense of responsibility and her love for her siblings. He offers them financial security, a warm house, comfort, something Angel, in his callous abandonment, failed absolutely to provide.
And the sources are clear. Tess's resistance is finally broken not by desire or even weakness, but by necessity and guilt. She sees no other way to save her mother and siblings from destitution and the workhouse.
She gives in. She becomes Alec's mistress, sacrificing her integrity for her family's physical survival. It is the ultimate surrender driven by selfless love and despair.
And of course, the dramatic irony strikes again, hard and swift. Just as she makes this ultimate sacrifice, destroying her own chance at future happiness, Angel returns from Brazil.
He returns after enduring his own hardships, sickness, failure in farming, and a profound crisis of conscience. He has had time to think, time to realize the profound error of his ways, the hypocrisy of his judgment. He's filled with deep remorse.
The sources suggest his failure abroad stripped him of his arrogance, allowing him finally to see the true woman. He has come back to find her and beg forgiveness.
He tracks her down to a fashionable seaside resort where she's living with Alec, dressed finely but completely miserable.
The exterior of wealth hides a core of complete emotional emptiness.
The confrontation is just heartbreaking. Angel, finally ready to offer the true, unconditional love she deserved, stands before her, a ghost of the man who abandoned her. Tess looks at the man who sacrificed her for an ideal and tells him simply, devastatingly, too late.
Too late.
She tells him he has lost her forever. He leaves, devastated, the full realization of his error cementing her ruin.
But the final, shocking act belongs to Tess. After Angel leaves, she confronts Alec, blaming him for robbing her of her last fragile chance at happiness with the man she truly loved.
For using her family's poverty against her.
And in a moment of pure desperation and rage, pushed far beyond her limits by fate, poverty, and male possessiveness, she grabs a carving knife and ends his life.
The act is swift and shocking. It is the one choice she finally makes for herself in a life defined by others' actions and fate's cruel timing. She is finally, violently taking control of her own narrative.
The immediate aftermath is a brief, dreamlike grace period. Tess finds Angel, who, having finally accepted the reality of his own guilt and her circumstances, takes her back. For a few days, they are finally together, fugitives.
Living the passionate, denied honeymoon they should have had.
Their final haunting journey ends at the ancient mystical site of Stonehenge. This is another highly symbolic setting, a pagan temple far older than the Christian morality that condemned her.
It's a moment of spiritual refuge, positioning her outside the bounds of the rigid Victorian society that judged and condemned her innocence.
But dawn breaks. In the external world, the system of law and morality finds them. Tess is arrested. The ultimate injustice is realized.
Tess is punished by the law for the only definitive choice she made for herself, the murder of her tormentor. While Angel Clare, whose rigid ideals and cruel abandonment sealed her fate, walks away free.
Absolved by his belated remorse. He has caused the ruin, but only she pays the ultimate price. The question is unavoidable. Who was the real victim and who was the true villain in the eyes of the universe?
Okay, so now that we have covered the relentless plot with all the necessary detail, let's take a comprehensive deep dive into the major themes that Hardy masterfully weaves into the structure of this novel. Let's start with the most oppressive one, fate versus free will.
Right. Hardy's universe, as suggested by your sources, is profoundly deterministic. It argues that fate is brutally swift and just overwhelming. Tess is perpetually fighting a current that is too strong for her.
But how does Hardy use the structure of the plot, specifically, to reinforce this sense of unavoidable doom for the listener?
He uses those crucial, tiny coincidences that have enormous consequences. The sources list three key examples that feel less like accidents and more like, I don't know, cosmic malice.
Yeah.
First, the fatal impalement of Prince, which kicks off her sense of guilt. Second, the simple physical act of the letter with Tess's confession sliding under the carpet on the wedding night.
And third, Angel's return being precisely too late, mere hours after Tess surrendered to Alec.
It's the timing that's so devastating. If Angel had returned one day sooner, or if Tess's letter had simply fallen on top of the carpet, the entire trajectory of the novel would change, but they don't.
These moments aren't just coincidence. They're plot mechanisms that reinforce this tragic, pessimistic view of the world. Tess is constantly fighting against a universe that conspires against her.
It just crushes every small hope with perfectly timed bad luck.
So our second crucial theme is the profound hypocrisy of society and idealism, and that's centered squarely on Angel Clare's collapse. This is where Hardy criticizes his contemporary Victorian society most fiercely.
It is. Angel's intellectual ideals, his rejection of rigid church doctrines, his belief in a purer life, they all just crumble instantly when faced with the messy, painful, visceral reality of Tess's past.
And the judgment is entirely external. Society, and Angel as its proxy, judges Tess entirely based on what happened to her, the fact of her violation, not who she is.
A kind, generous, intelligent woman.
Exactly. They assign guilt where there should be only sympathy for a victim of injustice. It's a clear case of victim blaming dressed up as moral principle.
And Hardy's subtitle is so key here. A pure woman faithfully presented. He was deliberately challenging the Victorian double standard that demanded sexual purity in women above all else. By calling Tess pure, Hardy forces the reader to acknowledge that her moral innocence remains intact, regardless of her traumatic experiences.
Angel's failure is to ignore the author's own declaration and instead embrace the conventional, cruel standards of his upbringing.
Right. Which brings us to the core tension. Innocence and guilt. The profound and overwhelming guilt Tess feels over Prince's death is the inescapable motivator for all her later suffering. It compels her to go to the slopes, and it later compels her to sacrifice herself to Alec to save her family.
That is the tragedy. Her inherent innocence, her capacity for self-sacrifice, becomes the very thing that destroys her. She's defined by events that were not her fault.
Her profound internal sense of moral responsibility is far heavier than any external shame, and it's that self-blame that makes her vulnerable to both Alec's manipulation and Angel's judgment.
And finally, we have to acknowledge the theme of trauma and resilience. Tess's journey, despite the relentless pain, is one of incredible strength. She endures the shame of Marlett, the physical brutality of Flintcomb Ash, and the emotional abandonment by her husband.
Her resilience is tied to her capacity for love, her fierce maternal love for sorrow, and her tenacious determination to escape the shadows of her past and find honest work. She is not a passive figure. She actively seeks agency until her final surrender is forced by the destitution of her entire family.
It shows the strength required simply to survive the expectations and judgments placed upon her.
Let's move into a deeper character analysis, beginning with the two poles of masculinity that pull Tess apart.
We have to start with Tess herself, the ultimate tragic figure. Hardy imbues her with a pure soul trapped in a tainted world.
She's driven by a sense of responsibility far beyond her years, which is, ironically, the engine of her misery.
She possesses this immense dignity, enduring those cruel taunts in Marlett, and an immense fierce capacity for love, which she shows both to Sorrow and in her ultimate forgiveness to Angel.
But the tragedy of her character is rooted in the fact that Angel placed her on an impossible pedestal. She was destroyed not by her own fault, but by his rigid, unforgiving view of what a woman's purity should entail.
An ideal she could never live up to because it was based on fiction, not reality.
Then we have Alec d'Urberville, the false facade. He's characterized by casual cruelty, meaning his malice is almost a recreational activity.
The fact that his name was purchased mirrors the superficiality of his character, which we see in his purchased faith during his temporary preacher phase.
He is a pure manipulator who sees Tess as property to be owned and enjoyed. Even his pursuit is calculated. He's not a man driven by love, but by possessiveness and a sense of entitlement that his wealth and purchased status afford him.
His cruelty is straightforward. You know what he is from the start.
Which brings us to the true complex figure, the one critics still debate most intensely. Angel Clare, the destructive idealist.
He's initially drawn to authenticity and rejects intellectual rigidity, yet he becomes ironically trapped by his own rigid, visceral idealism.
We have to examine his failure closely. He had the intellectual freedom to forgive, he rejected the narrow doctrines of his father, yet when faced with reality, he fell back into the worst kind of conventional judgment.
His hypocrisy is indeed staggering in the face of Tess's immediate forgiveness of his own lesser fault.
And the source notes that he finds deep remorse at the end, but only after causing ruin.
And that late remorse is selfish, isn't it? It comes too late to save her life or reputation. Arguably, his return is only there to save his soul, allowing him to walk away free from the ultimate consequence, while Tess pays the penalty for his moral failure.
Exactly. Angel's tragedy is the failure of the intellectual man. He could rationalize moral superiority, but he couldn't actualize human empathy when it truly mattered. That's why he is the destructive idealist. His idealism destroys the thing he claims to love.
Let's turn our attention now to the craft of the novel, because Hardy's style is crucial to amplifying the tragic impact of the story.
It really is.
One of the narrative techniques that absolutely heightens the tragedy is Hardy's relentless use of dramatic irony. We, the readers, often know more than the characters, creating this sense of inescapable doom.
Right, the timing of that unseen letter, or Angel's confession before Tess's, we watch these events unfold knowing the devastating outcome, and it just tightens the screw of unavoidable fate.
And the setting, as we've discussed, is never accidental. It is always a metaphor for Tess's spiritual and emotional state. We can track her entire descent and recovery just by the location.
The journey begins in the chase, the dense, ancient forest, which symbolizes primal darkness, the regression to instinct, and violation. It's a place outside of moral structure where civilization fails.
She seeks recovery and absolution at Talbothays, the baptism, which symbolizes healing, peace, and hope. It is a regenerative place, lush, fertile, and pastoral.
It mirrors her brief rediscovered inner health and innocence. The sheer sensory detail of milk and warmth emphasizes this restorative feeling.
But when Angel rejects her, she descends into Flint Cum Ash, defined as the punishment or hell, an unforgiving landscape of cold mud and sharp stones, reflecting her emotional despair and soul-crushing labor.
Hardy uses the barrenness of the land to reflect the barrenness of her hope.
Her final moments of freedom take place at Stonehenge, the ancient pagan temple. This is a crucial ending place because it literally positions her outside the bounds of the Christian morality and restrictive Victorian society that judged and condemned her.
It's an assertion of an older, purer, non-judgmental natural order that existed before the man-made laws that destroyed her.
And Hardy uses powerful sensory detail throughout. We talked about the vivid reds, strawberries, roses, Alec's lips at the slopes, signaling danger and superficial seduction, a warning color.
And that contrasts so sharply with the descriptions of the cold mud, sharp stones, and relentless grayness of Flint Cum Ash, emphasizing the pain and erosion of her spirit.
This attention to sensory detail makes the injustice feel physical, not just philosophical. It grounds the abstract themes of morality and judgment in Tess's brutal, tactile reality.
And this book was highly controversial when it was first published, forcing Hardy to change the subtitle for serialization. The debate about it remains fascinating, specifically around that subtitle, A Pure Woman Faithfully Presented.
The historical debate about Tess centers almost entirely on Angel Clare and Hardy's audacity in declaring Tess pure.
He was essentially indicting his entire readership. The question for contemporary critics was unavoidable. Was Angel merely a product of his time, reflecting the incredibly rigid Victorian morals that demanded sexual purity in women above all else? Or was his reaction a universal failure of character?
A failure of empathy and basic human decency that transcends the 19th century.
Precisely. The sources suggest that the lasting conversation focuses on the failure of the intellectual man. Angel had the intellectual capacity to reject rigid morality, but not the emotional strength when it came to his own property, his wife.
His ideals were academic, Tess's reality was not.
This is exactly why the story maintains incredible relevance today. The sources highlight that Tess being canceled by her entire world for something that wasn't her fault, specifically her trauma, feels incredibly familiar in our own digital age.
That's the essential aha moment for a modern audience, isn't it? We understand public shaming and victim blaming acutely in our own era.
Tess is the ultimate victim of a cultural climate that privileges appearance over truth and punishes the vulnerable for the actions of the powerful, be that a powerful rake like Alec or a powerful social ideal like Angel's purity standard.
The story endures not just as a piece of history, but as a timeless tragedy about fate and injustice.
It asks whether it is possible for a woman, once tainted by no fault of her own, to ever be truly redeemed by society or even by love. Hardy gives us a resounding and bleak answer. No, not when the systems of judgment are controlled by hypocrisy.
What a devastating deep dive into the relentless tragedy of Tess Durbeyfield. As we wrap up this extensive exploration, I want to share what struck me the most personally about this story's mechanics.
Please.
What consistently haunts me is the sequence of devastating timing, the physical mechanics of fate that rob Tess of hope at every turn. The unseen letter, Angel's too late return, and Prince's death, it all just cemented the feeling that her suffering was unavoidable. It makes you feel complicit, watching a train wreck in slow motion, unable to intervene.
For me, my insight centers squarely on Angel Clare's reaction. The collapse of his intellectual ideals in the face of visceral reality is the true turning point of the book. It shows that judgment often comes not from our enemies, but from those we rely on most.
Those who claim to love us for our true selves.
But who in reality only love the ideal they project onto us.
And that hypocrisy makes his love far more damaging than Alec's simple, predictable cruelty. Alec was a predator who wanted to possess her body. Angel was a judge disguised as a savior who wanted to possess her soul and her perfect past.
Which brings us back to the story's most haunting question. Who was the real victim and who was the true villain? Was Tess's final desperate act, the murder of Alec, the only true free choice she made, and thus the only thing society was finally able to punish her for?
It's an act of destruction, but it's also the only moment of genuine agency in her entire life.
A profound, uncomfortable realization that she only found agency in destruction, not in love or resilience. And here's the final thought for you to take away and mull over. We've established that the entire tragedy rests on Tess's profound sense of guilt and her desperate need for atonement.
Okay.
So consider how fundamentally different the story would be if Tess had simply not felt responsible for Prince's death or for her family's poverty. If she had externalized the blame for the accident as just bad luck, would she have been compelled to go to the slopes?
That's a great question.
Does this show that her crushing self-blame, this profound moral burden she carried, even more than the external cruelty of society, was the ultimate, inescapable driver of her fate? The tragedy starts within her own heart. This is something for you to explore as you delve into this novel.
A stunning, complex question to leave us with. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly detailed look at Tess of the D'Urbervilles. We've covered the heartbreaking plot, the symbolic settings, and the enduring themes of injustice and hypocrisy that make this novel so powerful today. We encourage you to explore this masterpiece with these deeply analyzed themes in mind. Until the next deep dive, stay curious.